If you spoke too much, you could never undo it. One sentence was enough to follow you for the rest of your life, and there was no apology, no explanation, no later courage that could remove it. In the Viking world, words did not fade. They settled. They hardened. And once they did, they became a verdict. Silence wasn't politeness, it was protection. Because the moment you spoke, you exposed yourself to memory, and memory was how people were punished. Most people imagine Vikings as loud, boasting, laughing, shouting across fire-lit halls. That image is comforting, and it's wrong. The real danger lived in what was remembered. Noise came later, in stories told by people who needed chaos to explain power. The actual world was quieter, controlled, unforgiving. Every word you spoke traveled. It was repeated when you weren't there. It was recalled years later by men who never forgot a debt or a slight. A promise spoken aloud bound you. An insult demanded blood or submission. Even praise was dangerous because it created expectations you could never escape. This is where it became permanent. You could change your behavior, you could work harder, you could prove yourself again and again. The words were still there, attached to your name, socially, indelibly. So people learned early to speak less. A quiet person wasn't overlooked. They were watched, because silence made you unreadable. And unreadable people survived longer. Viking communities were small. There was nowhere to disappear. Everyone knew everyone. Memory replaced guards. Reputation replaced prisons. Say the wrong thing once, and it stayed with you. Not as emotion, as structure. At the thing, the public assembly, this pressure became visible. You didn't perform. You didn't explain. You stood in front of men who had known you since childhood, men who remembered every hesitation you ever showed. You stated facts, briefly. Anything more sounded like fear, and fear was remembered. Then came the pause. This was worse than punishment. Men would wait after you finished speaking, not because they were thinking, because they were testing you, to see if you would fill the silence, to see if you would betray yourself. Anyone who rushed to explain revealed anxiety. Anyone who kept talking revealed weakness. The one who endured the pause, who let others become uncomfortable first, gained power without moving. This was the moment you stopped being protected. No one said this rule out loud, but everyone knew it. Once you spoke, you were no longer judged only on what you said. You were judged on what others could force out of you next. The first words made the second unavoidable. The third exposed patterns. And patterns were how men were ranked. This is when people began to speak strategically, not to express, to limit damage. Short answers, neutral phrasing, statements that revealed nothing useful to remember, because the worst position wasn't being wrong. It was being predictable. Those who revealed their values too clearly became easy targets. Those who named their loyalties invited tests. Those who spoke with certainty were challenged until they broke. So certainty vanished from speech. People learned to sound unfinished, to leave room, to let others guess. Ambiguity became armor, and then the system stopped needing to act. Because once enough men were broken by memory, everyone else adjusted. You didn't need to see a punishment happen to you, you only needed to watch it happen to someone else. A man would speak too openly, not arrogantly, just openly. He would say what he believed, what he intended, what he hoped for. Nothing dramatic followed, no confrontation, no violence, just a shift. People stopped seeking his opinion. His words were no longer repeated. When disputes were settled, he wasn't asked to stand nearby. When plans were made, his name came last, if at all. He was still there, still alive, still working, but he had been marked as unsafe. Everyone noticed, and no one asked why. This is when self-policing began. Fathers didn't warn their sons with lectures. They corrected them with looks, with pauses, with silence that lasted a second too long. Long enough to hurt, long enough to teach. Mothers didn't forbid speech. They redirected it. Away from the fire, away from gatherings, away from witnesses. Children learned to measure rooms before they learned to read faces. They learned which men remembered too well, which women repeated stories accurately, which silences meant danger. By adulthood, the rules no longer felt imposed, they felt natural. This is where safety disappeared completely, because once the fear lives inside you, the system never has to show itself again. And this belief extended beyond people. Vikings believed attention invited consequence from everything. The land was alive. The sea listened. Forests watched. Certain names were avoided. Certain words were never spoken at night, especially near water. Silence wasn't hiding. It was blending. They believed the future moved forward quietly, not with warnings, not with signs. Talking too much was seen as tempting fate. Better not to name hopes, better not to announce fears. Once spoken, they could be taken. Men in the sagas often sensed what was coming. They almost never said it aloud, because saying it didn't change the outcome. It only exposed you to it. Silence was acceptance, and acceptance was strength. This is where the myth collapses. We're told Vikings wanted to be remembered, but remembrance didn't come from noise. It came from control. Boasting existed, but only in ritual. Confined, limited. Outside of that, it marked you as reckless, as someone who didn't understand how fragile honor was. And honor, once damaged, never fully returned. This is why silence became a weapon. Not dramatic, not violent, precise. A man could end a rivalry by refusing to respond. He could weaken another by letting their words hang unanswered. Silence forced others to act first. And acting first carried risk. Those who spoke too quickly made themselves visible. Those who waited decided the outcome, but silence had a final function: exclusion. In a world without prisons, this was the real sentence. You weren't attacked, you weren't confronted, you were ignored. People spoke around you, not to you. Your name stopped being used, your story stopped being told. Outlawry didn't begin with violence, it began with silence. You became invisible before you ever left. Even children learned this. A child who spoke too freely wasn't shouted at. They were met with stillness, with withdrawn attention. That lesson stayed for life. When outsiders arrived later, they misunderstood this. They called the Norse grim, emotionless. They mistook discipline for emptiness. But silence wasn't absence. It was concentration. Think of the voyages. Weeks at sea. Wood creaking, water striking the hull. Men sitting shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, not because they had nothing to say, because words wouldn't make the sea safer. A careless joke could fracture trust. A boast could invite challenge. A complaint could turn men against each other. So the safest choice was often no choice at all. This is where the trap becomes clear. Vikings listened more than they spoke, to pauses, to weather, to shifts in tone. Meaning lived in what wasn't said. Even insults followed this rule. The most dangerous ones weren't shouted. They were delivered quietly. One word, placed carefully, could end a reputation or start a feud that lasted generations. So most people chose restraint. Modern retellings erase this. Replace it with shouting and spectacle. Because silence is uncomfortable. It demands patience, and patience exposes weakness. The real Viking world rewarded those who waited, who watched, who understood that speaking was irreversible. Because once a Viking spoke, there was no taking it back. And when they finally did speak, people listened, not because they were loud, but because they were rare. Silence wasn't something they endured. It was something they mastered. In a world where every word could bind you, betray you, or erase you, mastery of silence was the highest form of control.